Imagine this. You walk into a fancy upscale restaurant in the heart of a quaint little town where the air smells like rich, warm food and the soft clinking of glasses sets a soothing rhythm. The evening is calm, peaceful, the kind of place where you'd expect nothing to go wrong. But what if, in that very moment, someone looks at you and makes a decision about who you are? What if that decision isn't based on who you really are, but on how they choose to see you? A girl walks in, quiet, reserved, trying to find a little peace, and she's about to learn a harsh lesson, one that will forever change the course of her evening, her trust, and her future. And you know what? It's a lesson someone else needs to learn too. How far would you go to stand up for what's right? Would you speak up or stay silent? What if, in the process, you uncovered a secret so big that it would shatter everything you thought you knew about the people around you? Stick around, because this is no ordinary night in a restaurant. This is a story about judgment, redemption, and a choice. A choice that will either change a young girl's life or destroy her forever. Don't blink. You won't want to miss a second. Because by the end of this night, everything you thought you knew will be turned upside down. Hello everyone, welcome to Life Story. If you're new here, thank you for joining us. We're about to take a deep dive into a story that's as powerful as it is eye-opening. If you're returning, welcome back. You already know how these stories can stir your heart and challenge your perspective. Before we dive in, don't forget to hit that like button and subscribe if you want to see more stories that make you think, feel, and maybe even change the way you see the world. Trust me, you won't want to miss what comes next. So sit back, relax, and let's unfold a story you'll remember for a long time. It's a quiet evening in the heart of a small, picturesque town. The kind of town where everyone knows your name, where cobblestone streets wind through little shops and cafes, each with their lights softly glowing. On the corner of Maple and Elm, there's a family-owned restaurant, a hidden gem for locals who crave a touch of elegance without losing that warm, welcoming charm. Inside, the atmosphere is perfect. The soft hum of conversation fills the room, blending seamlessly with the distant notes of a piano playing something timeless. Tables are set with crisp white linens, delicate floral arrangements, and flickering candlelight that dances in the reflections of polished silverware. The evening feels unshakably calm, almost serene, but sometimes calmness is deceptive. Beneath the surface, storms often brew in the most unexpected places. Leona, a waitress in her mid-20s, moves between tables with sharp precision. Her hair is pinned neatly back, her uniform pressed, and her outward demeanor perfectly professional, at least to most. But look closer, and you'll see the cracks. Leona carries a bitterness she barely hides, a chip on her shoulder that colors her interactions. She's quick to judge, quicker to snap, and feels her job is something she's owed rather than something she's earned. Leona doesn't see herself as unkind. No, she tells herself she's just realistic. She prides herself on calling things as they are. But in truth, Leona's judgments often reveal more about her insecurities than they do about the people she serves. And tonight she's about to meet someone who will test her patience, her pride, and her very perception of herself. That someone is Zoe, a soft-spoken girl in her late teens, walking into the restaurant alongside her father. Zoe isn't dressed like most of the guests tonight. Her shoes are scuffed, her jacket a little oversized, and her demeanor hesitant. She's the kind of girl who avoids eye contact, who keeps her head down in a world that hasn't been kind to her. What Leona doesn't see, what she chooses not to see, is the quiet strength beneath Zoe's reserved nature. Zoe's kind, thoughtful, and tougher than she looks, but she's also carrying the weight of being misunderstood. At school, she's the target of whispers, the subject of cruel jokes. Tonight, she just wants to enjoy a quiet dinner with her father, Theo, and maybe forget the world outside for a while. Then there's Theo! Early 40s, tall and composed, with a wisdom that comes from living through his own struggles. He's the kind of man who commands respect without ever raising his voice, a quiet protector who doesn't let his position define his actions. What no one else in the restaurant knows, not even Leona, is that Theo is no ordinary customer. He's the owner of this very restaurant, a secret he's kept for a reason. He believes in observing his employees, understanding how they treat others when they think, no one's watching. For Theo, kindness isn't just a policy, it's a principle. And tonight he'll learn just how deeply some people need to be reminded of that. But here's the twist. Theo isn't here to make a scene or throw his weight around. He's here for something much simpler, a quiet meal with his daughter. The evening begins just as any other. Conversations flow, plates are served, and for a moment, everything feels perfectly ordinary. But life has a way of catching us off guard. What starts as an unassuming night will soon spiral into an unforgettable confrontation. And in the center of it all, choices. Choices that will define character, reveal secrets, and leave lessons that none of them, neither Leona, Zoe, nor Theo, will ever forget. What would you do if you were Zoe? What would you do if you were Leona? And how far would you go to stand up for what's right? Don't go anywhere. This story is just getting started. And while you're here, take a moment to hit that like button and subscribe for more powerful stories that challenge and inspire, because sometimes the smallest moments lead to the biggest lessons. Now let's see how this night unfolds. As the restaurant hums with the soft clinking of silverware and quiet conversations, the door opens and in walks Zoe and her father, Theo. The quiet girl in scruffy clothes and her father, with his calm, wise demeanour, step into the restaurant like any other guests, unaware that the night ahead will not unfold as they expect. Leona, standing behind the counter, takes a moment to glance up as the pair enters. It doesn't take long for her to form an opinion, one that she doesn't bother to question. Her eyes narrow slightly as they take in Zoe's appearance, scruffy, dishevelled clothes that don't fit the upscale atmosphere of the restaurant. Zoe's shy, hesitant steps only confirm the judgment already forming in Leona's mind. This girl, in her eyes, is out of place. Leona watches them as they're seated at a table near the back of the room. The father, Theo, holds the chair out for his daughter, his hands gentle and attentive. But Zoe, she doesn't seem to fit in here, not in the way the other guests do. Her clothes, though simple, are clean, and her demeanour, though soft, is respectful. Yet, in Leona's eyes, there's something about her, something off. Perhaps it's the way she carries herself. Perhaps it's the way she doesn't fit the polished image of a diner at a fancy restaurant. Leona shakes her head slightly, as if to rid herself of the thoughts. But as she returns to her task, her mind lingers, making assumptions, painting an image of Zoe that isn't grounded in reality but in bias. She doesn't know Zoe, she doesn't care to. To her, Zoe is nothing more than someone who doesn't belong here. Leona takes a deep breath, pushing her judgment aside, or so she thinks. She forces a smile and approaches the table where Zoe and Theo are seated, the fake cheeriness in her voice betraying the resentment simmering just beneath the surface. "Good evening," she greets them, her voice overly sweet. "How can I help you today?" Zoe looks up, her eyes kind but guarded. She smiles gently, her voice soft but clear. "I'd like the vegetable soup, please, and a glass of water." Leona doesn't reply immediately, taking a moment to look at Zoe. She doesn't look at her father, Theo, who's seated across from her, his gaze calm and steady. Instead, Leona focuses on Zoe, on the way she seems unsure, the way her clothes aren't quite right for a place like this. "Are you sure that's what you want?" Leona asks, her tone dripping with condescension. "Maybe you'd like something more fitting for the occasion?" Zoe blinks, taken aback by the question. She looks up at Theo, then back at Leona, trying to mask the confusion. "No, the soup will be fine," she says quietly, trying to keep things polite, trying not to make a scene. Leona doesn't seem to notice Zoe's discomfort. In fact, she doesn't seem to care. She rolls her eyes slightly, her lips curling into a forced smile, and she turns to leave, only to return a moment later, tossing the menu down onto the table a little too forcefully. "Very well," she mutters, her voice thick with impatience, before turning on her heel and walking away. Zoe, unsure of what just happened, glances at her father, trying to shake off the unease that has settled over her. Theo, ever the protector, watches the interaction with a careful, unreadable expression. But he doesn't react immediately. He knows Leona well enough to understand that she's not one for subtlety and that her actions might escalate if not addressed properly. The evening continues, the food arriving at the table as expected. Zoe picks at her soup, but her stomach is tight with unease. The discomfort she feels isn't just from the food, it's the way Leona had treated her, the way she had been so dismissive, as though Zoe's presence wasn't even worthy of basic respect. Zoe tries to ignore it, tries to enjoy the evening, but the quiet sting lingers in the back of her mind. It doesn't take long before Leona returns to the table again. This time, her attitude is even more apparent, her forced smile now replaced with a sharp edge. She stands over the table for a moment, looking down at Zoe as though she's something beneath her. "You know," Leona begins, her voice suddenly much colder, "it's not every day we get someone like you here. A little out of place, don't you think?" Zoe looks up, trying not to show how much the words hurt. She simply nods, keeping her gaze low. But as she opens her mouth to respond, Leona interrupts her again, speaking over her with a casual, almost mocking tone. "You really shouldn't be eating in a place like this, you know? A girl like you, someone who doesn't know better, who doesn't fit in, doesn't deserve to eat in a fancy restaurant like this." The words hit Zoe like a cold wave. She freezes, her hands trembling slightly as she tries to process what was just said. She feels the sting of humiliation, but she bites her lip, not allowing the tears to show. She's used to being looked down on, to being made to feel small, but this cuts deeper than anything she's experienced. Leona's words grow more cutting, more pointed, and then without warning she does the unthinkable. She takes a plate of food, a fresh serving of risotto, and without any remorse she flings it across the table, the food landing directly on Zoe's lap. The room falls silent for a moment. The shock of the act hangs in the air like a thick fog. Zoe looks down at the food now splattered across her clothes, a mixture of disbelief and hurt washing over her. She blinks quickly, trying to hold back tears, but the sting of the moment is undeniable. Theo's hand tightens on the edge of his chair, his jaw tightening. He stands up slowly, but there's no anger in his movements. Just quiet control, the kind of calm that comes from knowing how to handle a situation without losing yourself in it. He looks directly at Leona, his voice low and steady. "I need to speak to the manager, please." Leona looks at him, her expression faltering for a moment. But she doesn't apologize. She doesn't seem to realize the gravity of what she's just done. Instead, she glares at Theo, her face flushed with some mixture of embarrassment and defiance. But she does nothing to stop him. Theo walks toward the manager, his calm demeanor not shifting for a second, even as the tension in the room grows thicker. The guests have stopped eating, stopped talking. They watch in silence, some uncertain, others disgusted by the way Leona treated Zoe. But no one speaks up, not yet. Zoe, for her part, remains composed. She wipes her eyes quickly, standing up to leave, but Theo places a hand on her shoulder, gently guiding her back into her seat. "It's okay," he whispers softly, though he knows that it's not really okay. Not yet. Not until things change. But as the moment hangs suspended in time, one thing becomes clear. The quiet, patient father who had hoped for a peaceful evening is now faced with a decision. The storm that had been building since the moment Leona laid eyes on Zoe is about to come to a head. She opens her mouth again, but this time, her voice shakes with a mixture of anger and embarrassment. "I didn't know! She didn't fit in here. I thought she was some entitled rich kid, someone who didn't belong. I'm sorry, I don't know what came over me." Theo's expression hardens slightly, but there's no anger in his eyes. Just disappointment. He lets the silence hang in the air, letting the weight of his words settle between them. "You thought she didn't belong here," Theo repeats slowly, "because she didn't dress like the other guests, or because she didn't meet your standards of who should be sitting at this table." Leona's defenses falter. She can't bring herself to argue. She knew, deep down, that she had judged Zoe before ever taking the time to know her. She assumed so much about her based on appearances, and that was a mistake she could never take back. But Leona tries again, grasping at whatever excuse might salvage her pride. "I didn't mean to hurt her. I thought I was helping. She wasn't even dressed properly for a place like this." Theo shakes his head, his gaze unwavering. "Leona, do you know why I built this restaurant? It wasn't just to make money. It wasn't just to serve food. It was to create a space where people, no matter who they are, no matter how they dress, where they come from, could feel welcome. To treat everyone equally with respect." Theo pauses, his voice growing softer. You made an assumption about Zoe based on how she looked, and that was wrong. Everyone deserves respect. Everyone. Leona looks down at her feet, her hands trembling slightly as the realization begins to sink in. She had been so blinded by her own prejudices, by her insecurities, that she hadn't even considered the possibility that she could be wrong. Theo watches her closely, his expression unreadable. But as the silence lingers, his mind drifts to another place. The next words out of his mouth are not just for Leona, they're for the audience. For you. You know? Theo begins, his voice softer now, as if sharing a quiet secret. It wasn't always like this. I didn't start out as the man who owned this restaurant. The sound of Theo's voice shifts, a subtle change, a deeper tone. It's as if the room itself grows quieter, waiting for him to continue. I grew up in a small town. My family didn't have much. I remember my mother working 2 jobs just to put food on the table. And I remember every single day hearing people talk about people like us, the lower class, the poor people. Theo pauses, his eyes distant for a moment. I hated it. I hated the way they looked down on us, but I also hated the way we let ourselves believe that we didn't belong in certain spaces. So I made a promise to myself that one day I would create something different, something that could stand for respect, for everyone, no matter where they came from. He looks at Leona now, his gaze steady. It didn't come easy. I had to fight for everything I have, but I never forgot why I started, because no one deserves to be judged based on how they look or where they come from. We're all just people. Leona stands still, her eyes wide with a new understanding. The story Theo shared cuts deeper than she could have imagined. This man, this calm, composed owner, had fought for his place in the world, just as so many people do. He had worked tirelessly to create a space of equality, only for her to tarnish it with her own judgment. And now Theo waits. His silence gives Leona the chance to reflect, to realize that redemption doesn't come without change. In that moment, the room feels heavy with the weight of Theo's words and the burden of what lies ahead for Leona. The tension in the restaurant is palpable, the hum of conversation now a mere whisper as the murmurs of the incident echo throughout the dining room. Leona stands by the counter, her back slightly hunched, the weight of her actions pressing down on her with every passing second. The once confident demeanour she had carried so easily earlier is now a shell, a mask, slipping away to reveal something far more vulnerable. Her gaze flickers nervously across the room, her eyes avoiding Theo, who is still seated with Zoe at their table. She watches the guests, some of whom have quietly begun to leave, their meals unfinished, their thoughts clearly too consumed by the incident to focus on their food. Others remain, but their discomfort is evident. They exchange glances, unsure whether they should speak up or not, unsure if they should stand with Zoe, or remain silent and let the moment pass. Leona shifts uncomfortably from one foot to the other, torn between the urge to disappear into the kitchen and the overwhelming sense of guilt that has started to take root deep inside her. It's one thing to make a snap judgment about someone, it's another to act on it so brazenly, to publicly humiliate a person without a second thought. And now, standing in the middle of her workplace, the realization hits her hard. She's just crossed a line that cannot be erased by a simple apology. The consequences of her actions are far more profound than she could have ever imagined. She takes a shaky breath, her hands trembling slightly as she reaches for a clean towel to wipe down the counter, the gesture more of a distraction than an actual attempt to clean anything. The reality of what she's done gnaws at her from the inside, and the uncomfortable silence surrounding her only amplifies it. As the moments pass, Theo rises from his seat, his movements calm and deliberate. He walks over to Leona, his presence unshaken despite the storm of emotions swirling between them. There is no anger in his eyes, only a quiet disappointment, an expression that seems to pierce right through the defensiveness Leona has built around herself. He doesn't raise his voice, doesn't demand an apology, but his words carry weight. "Leona," he says, his voice firm but not unkind, you need to apologise to Zoe. Personally, you've crossed a line and this isn't the kind of place where that kind of behaviour is acceptable. Leona swallows hard, her throat dry. She opens her mouth to speak, but no words come out. Her mind races, but she knows that any attempt to excuse herself will only make things worse. She wants to apologize, wants to make it right, but she can't shake the feeling that the damage has already been done. How can she fix something that felt so intentional, even if it wasn't? Theo continues, his tone unwavering. You have two choices here. You can apologize to her face to face, or if you can't bring yourself to do that, you can leave. I'm giving you that choice, because that's the kind of man I am. He pauses, looking at her, his eyes not angry, but disappointed. But if you stay, this can't happen again. Not in my restaurant, not to anyone. Leona stands frozen for a moment, caught between pride and shame. The restaurant around her feels smaller now, the eyes of the guests on her making her feel exposed. Her mouth feels dry, her heartbeat loud in her ears. She could leave, walk away from the discomfort, from the situation that now feels so much bigger than she ever intended. Or she could do something she never thought she'd have to, apologize. The decision weighs heavily on her, but slowly she nods. She doesn't say anything, but there's a silent resolve in her eyes now. She knows what she has to do. Theo nods back as if reading her thoughts. He gives her a moment, allowing her to gather herself. I'll be waiting, he says softly, before returning to his seat. Leona stands there for a few more moments, her heart racing as she prepares to face Zoe, someone she had belittled, humiliated, and wrongly judged. She doesn't know how this will go, but she knows that it's time to face the consequences of her actions, no matter how hard it might be. Zoe, for her part, has remained seated, her hands folded in her lap as she waits for what will come next. The ordeal has left her shaken, but she is determined to remain composed. Theo sits beside her, his gaze never leaving the doorway where Leona now stands, steeling herself for the conversation that is about to unfold. Theo turns to Zoe, his voice low, but filled with a quiet sense of disappointment. I'm sorry you had to experience that, Zoe, he says. No one should ever be treated that way, but I want you to understand I will not tolerate that behavior in my restaurant, no matter who it's coming from. Zoe nods, her expression calm. She appreciates her father's words, but they don't make the situation any easier. I know, Dad, she replies softly. I understand, but I don't want you to do anything rash. People make mistakes. Maybe she just needs to understand what she did. Theo looks at her with a mixture of pride and sadness. It's not just about understanding, Zoe. It's about accountability and making sure it doesn't happen again. Zoe's gaze drifts toward the entrance, her heart beating a little faster as she hears Leona approaching. She takes a deep breath, her decision already made. She knows what she has to do. Leona steps forward, her feet heavy with each step as she approaches the table. She stands awkwardly in front of Zoe, her face flushed with embarrassment. For a long moment, neither of them speaks. Zoe looks up at Leona, her expression a mixture of hurt and calm maturity. I'm sorry! Leona finally manages, her voice cracking slightly as she forces the words out. I don't know why I said those things. I shouldn't have treated you that way. Zoe doesn't speak immediately. She takes a deep breath, letting the silence stretch between them. She can see the genuine remorse in Leona's eyes, even if it doesn't fully erase the pain of the incident. Zoe considers her response carefully, weighing her words. I know you're sorry, Zoe says quietly, her voice steady. But what you did was wrong. You hurt me, and you hurt others who might have witnessed this. But I know that everyone makes mistakes. Leona's eyes widen slightly, her own emotions threatening to overwhelm her. She opens her mouth to speak, but Zoe holds up a hand, signaling for her to wait. I'm not going to hold a grudge, Zoe continues, her voice soft but firm. You were wrong, but you don't have to stay that way. We all have the chance to do better. So, I forgive you. The words hang in the air between them, a simple but profound declaration of grace. Zoe's forgiveness isn't just for Leona. It's a reminder to everyone listening of the power of second chances, of the ability to move forward, even when things go wrong. Leona stands there stunned. She had expected anger, bitterness, perhaps even a harsh rejection. But this forgiveness, it catches her completely off guard. It stirs something inside her, a realization that what she had done was far worse than she had ever imagined. For the first time that night, Leona feels the weight of her actions not as a burden to run from, but as a chance to grow. She can feel the tears in her eyes, but she blinks them away quickly. "Thank you," Leona whispers, her voice thick with emotion. "I don't deserve your forgiveness, but I'm grateful for it." Zoe smiles gently. It's not about deserving, it's about learning and doing better. The moment is quiet, and in the stillness something shifts within Leona, within Zoe, and within everyone who has been watching. It's a reminder that grace, forgiveness, and understanding are often the hardest things to give, but also the most powerful. As the dust of the confrontation settles, a new quiet fills the restaurant. The once tense atmosphere now feels different, as if the weight of the previous moments has left the air. The hum of the conversations returns, but there's a noticeable shift. People are still speaking in hushed tones, but there's something else, a sense of reflection, a murmur of understanding. Leona stands before Zoe, her posture slumped, the traces of guilt still present in her eyes. She is no longer the waitress who thought she could get away with cruelty, no longer the person who judged based solely on appearance. In this moment, Leona has become something else, a person who is beginning to understand the cost of her actions and the power of redemption. She knows that this isn't just about the apology, but about the long road ahead. "Zoe," she begins, her voice trembling slightly, but stronger than it was earlier. I owe you an apology. I treated you terribly. I judged you without reason. You didn't deserve any of that." She pauses, her words slow, but coming from a place of true remorse. "I was wrong, and I'm sorry. I hurt you, and I can't take that back, but I want to try to do better. For you, for everyone." Zoe listens, her face soft, but her eyes still carrying the weight of the pain she had felt earlier. It's clear that the forgiveness Zoe offered wasn't just for Leona, it was for herself as well. But hearing these words from Leona, hearing the sincerity, deepens Zoe's respect for her. She nods quietly, the forgiveness still strong in her heart. "Thank you," Zoe replies, her voice steady. "I appreciate you saying that." But Leona doesn't stop there. She turns her gaze to Theo, standing in the background observing. Her gaze shifts, and for the first time there's a twinge of vulnerability in her eyes as she faces him. "Theo, I'm sorry to you too. I don't know what I was thinking. I made a mistake, and I let my insecurities control my actions. That's no excuse. I'm really sorry." Theo looks at her, his expression calm but thoughtful. There's no anger in his eyes anymore, just an understanding, a quiet recognition of the courage it takes to apologize for something so hurtful. "I appreciate that, Leona," Theo says, his voice surprisingly warm. It takes a lot to admit when you're wrong, and I think you've just taken the first step toward making things right." He pauses for a moment, weighing his words. Then, in a tone that is more than just managerial, more than just the voice of an employer, he adds, "I'm not going to fire you. I could, but I'm not going to. You've made a mistake, but it's a mistake that can be corrected. What matters now is what you do next. I believe you can change. I think you can do better, and I'll be able to guide you." Leona's eyes widen, and for a split second she feels a strange mixture of relief and disbelief. She had expected to be fired. She had expected the worst. But here in this moment, Theo is giving her something she didn't think she deserved. Another chance. She nods slowly, absorbing his words. She can feel something stir inside her, an urge to prove herself, to make good on this opportunity. "I won't let you down," she says quietly, her voice full of resolve. Days pass, and with each new day, Leona begins to transform. The change isn't instantaneous, nor is it easy, but it's genuine. Every morning, she walks into the restaurant with a renewed sense of purpose, a quiet understanding that her actions have consequences, and those consequences don't just affect others, they affect her too. She makes an effort to be kinder, to smile genuinely, to engage with the customers with respect and consideration. At first, it feels forced, awkward, even, but over time it becomes more natural. The coldness that had once characterized her interactions with guests begins to fade, replaced by a warmth that surprises even her. Leona starts to serve Zoe with an unexpected care, making sure her orders are right, asking if she needs anything extra. There's no more sarcasm in her voice, no more bitterness behind her words. Zoe notices the change, and though she doesn't bring it up directly, she feels a sense of relief. It's clear that Leona is trying, that she's making an effort. One evening, after a particularly busy dinner rush, Leona walks over to Zoe, hesitating for a moment before speaking. "How was everything?" she asks, her voice softer than before, a slight smile tugging at her lips. Zoe looks up at her, taking in the change, the genuine curiosity in her tone. "It was good. Everything's great, thank you." Leona smiles, a real smile this time, and nods. "I'm glad." And just like that, something shifts. There's a sense of mutual respect that hadn't been there before. It's subtle, but it's there. Leona is starting to realise that kindness doesn't have to be hard. It doesn't have to be something she forces. It can simply be natural. And Zoe, with her quiet grace, has helped her see that. Over the following days, Leona continues to make an effort. She speaks more to her co-workers, asking about their lives, genuinely interested in their responses. She starts to form bonds with them, light, easy conversations that break the walls she had built around herself. There's something freeing about it, something she never expected to feel. She starts to see her co-workers not as people she has to compete with, but as people she can connect with. It's not long before Leona's reputation begins to change. The customers notice the shift. They notice the warmth in her service, the way she makes them feel welcome, the way she listens to their needs without judgment. Slowly but surely, the whispers about her begin to turn from criticism to admiration. She's no longer the waitress who threw food at a guest. She's the one who's learning, who's growing. And in that growth, she's earning back something invaluable: trust. One quiet evening, after the restaurant has closed and the last few patrons have left, Theo asks Zoe to join him for a private conversation in his office. She's a little surprised, but she follows him in, her curiosity piqued. Theo sits behind his desk, folding his hands together, his expression serious but thoughtful. "Zoe," he begins, his voice steady, "I wanted to talk to you about Leona." Zoe raises an eyebrow but stays silent, listening. "I've been watching," Theo continues, "and I know it hasn't been easy for her. She's making an effort, but it's not just about the work. It's about the change within her. People don't change overnight, Zoe. It takes time, and it takes a willingness to want to change." Zoe nods, understanding where he's going. "I've noticed it too. She's different now. Not perfect, but trying." Theo smiles softly. "That's the key. We all make mistakes, Zoe. Even I've made my share. But what matters is how we choose to move forward. I believe in second chances, and I think Leona is learning what it means to treat people with kindness." Zoe thinks for a moment, reflecting on her own experiences, her own ability to forgive and grow. I think she's starting to see that too. Theo leans back in his chair, his eyes thoughtful. "We can't always control what happens to us, Zoe, but we can control how we respond. And we always have the power to choose grace, both for ourselves and for others." I wanted you to hear that. I think it's something important to remember. Zoe smiles, feeling a quiet sense of pride in the wisdom her father imparts. "I think I'm starting to understand." Theo looks at her, his gaze full of warmth. "Good, because the world needs more of that kind of understanding, more of that kind of forgiveness. And in a strange way, so does Leona. We're all human. We all have our flaws, but when we're willing to learn, to grow, that's when the real change happens." As Zoe leaves the office, her heart is full of the lessons she's learned, full of the hope that people can change, and full of the belief that kindness and understanding will always find a way. The days have passed and the transformation at the restaurant is evident. Leona and Zoe, once two people caught in a moment of tension, now share a quiet camaraderie. It's subtle, the way they exchange polite smiles when their paths cross, the way Leona goes out of her way to make sure Zoe's meal is perfect. What began as a deep misunderstanding has slowly evolved into a respectful relationship, one built on the foundation of growth and forgiveness. Leona, though still finding her way, has learned a lesson she will never forget. The once cynical waitress is now someone who greets every guest with genuine kindness, who speaks with humility and an open heart. The occasional misstep happens, but she's learning to take responsibility, to listen more, and to act with empathy. Zoe, too, has found peace in this new chapter. Her initial pain has softened, replaced by a sense of understanding and maturity beyond her years. She's become a quiet source of support for Leona, someone who exemplifies the grace that had once been extended to her. As Theo watches all this unfold, a sense of quiet satisfaction fills him. He knows that running a restaurant isn't just about the food, it's about the people. It's about the community they build, the respect they give, and the kindness they offer. His leadership, rooted in the values of integrity and compassion, has set the tone for the entire team. He doesn't just manage the staff, he leads by example. His actions speak volumes, reminding everyone that what happens behind the scenes can shape the very atmosphere of the space. The restaurant is no longer just a place to eat. It's become a space where people can grow, where they can learn from their mistakes, and where second chances are not only given, they're earned. The atmosphere in the restaurant now has a different energy. It's lighter, warmer. Guests notice the change, and many leave with a smile, appreciating not just the meal, but the warmth they feel from the staff. The subtle shift has made a big difference. In a world where it's easy to judge, it's much harder to understand. Every day, we're given a choice to act out of anger or to choose grace. Sometimes the smallest acts of kindness can have the biggest impact. I want to encourage all of you to reflect on how you treat others. It's not always easy, and we don't always get it right. But if we can approach each day with empathy, we can help make the world a better place, one kind act at a time. If you enjoyed this story and believe in the power of kindness, please like and subscribe. There are many more stories to come, each one reminding us that change starts with a single step. Thank you. Change doesn't happen overnight, but it starts with one act of kindness.